wasn't the fire they noticed first, it was the smell. Acrid, foul, thick enough to make the strongest stomach turn. On a scorched summer morning in rural New Jersey, a silent patch of countryside began choking on the smoke of something far more sinister than just burning debris. A passerby thought they'd stumbled upon a roadside trash fire, but when they looked closer, they saw something they were never meant to find. That's when they made the 911 call, a voice trembling, not just from heat, but from horror. There's something burning, and it doesn't look like garbage. What investigators would discover at that scene wouldn't just shake Cumberland County, it would haunt every detective involved. The horror unfolding that day would expose a dark, calculated evil, hiding in plain sight. This wasn't an accident. This wasn't a random act. This was deliberate, vicious, personal. And behind it all was a story. A life once full of love, family, laughter, and light, reduced to ashes. This was the beginning of the end for Tanya Cook. But who would do this to her? And why? The answers to those questions would lead police down a trail of disturbing behavior, jealousy, and betrayal, so twisted it blurred the line between monster and human. They weren't hunting a criminal. They were chasing down a ghost with a face people thought they knew. By the time you reach the end of this story, you may ask yourself, how well do we really know the people around us? Welcome to True Crimes Retells. If you're drawn to real stories that peel back the mask of humanity to expose the darkness beneath, you're in the right place. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and tap the bell, because the truth we tell here is never sugar-coated. Before we begin, drop a comment below. What do you think is more dangerous? Someone who kills out of rage, or someone who plans it with a smile? Now let's go back to the day Tanya Cook's life was stolen, and the chilling truth that was left behind in the smoke. Tanya Cook was the kind of woman who could light up a room, make you laugh, dance, forget your worries. But what most people didn't see was the weight she carried behind that smile. Behind the hairdos and the laughter was someone who was quietly hurting. See, while her siblings were busy walking down the aisle, raising kids, and building lives they dreamed of, Tanya was stuck in a cycle of heartbreak and disappointment. Relationship after relationship would collapse, leaving her feeling unwanted, unseen, left behind. But Tanya wasn't someone who begged for attention. She didn't chase luxuries. She only wanted the basics, what many would call a normal life. A home of her own, a husband, children to call her own, love, stability, peace. By 2018, Tanya was 32, still living in Vineland, New Jersey, still searching for that dream, still chasing happiness. Though it always seemed just out of reach, she hadn't given up, not yet. But that year, fate had already made other plans. Plans that would rob her of everything she ever hoped for. July 2nd, 2018, 8:17 a.m., somewhere in Lawrence Township, a passerby driving down a quiet rural road noticed something unusual in a field. Smoke rising from what looked like a heap of debris. Curiosity got the better of them. They pulled over to get a closer look. Maybe it was a brush fire, maybe just trash. But as they approached, their gut twisted. This wasn't just garbage, and it definitely wasn't just smoke. They turned and ran, hands trembling as they dialed 911. Whatever they'd just seen was something deeply wrong. When police arrived on scene, they immediately knew what they were looking at. This wasn't an accident. It was a crime scene, a gruesome one. They were looking at the remains of a person, unrecognizable, burned, and left in the open. A deliberate fire had been set, not just to destroy a body, but to erase evidence, to make her vanish, as if she'd never existed. Scattered across the field were fragments, pieces no human being should ever become. Investigators began the painstaking process of collecting every trace, every clue. They weren't just trying to solve a case, They were trying to piece together a person. The body was sent to the medical examiner's office for a full autopsy, and the findings were grim. The victim had been dead for at least a day and a half, likely placed in that field over 36 hours before discovery. She had severe trauma to the head, blunt force. There were scratches, bruises, signs of a brutal struggle. Whoever did this didn't just want Tanya gone. They wanted her to suffer. And beneath her fingernails, DNA, skin cells, a clue that she had fought hard for her life. Soon the victim was identified. Tanya Cook, 32 years old, dreams unfinished, life stolen. But even with her name, the puzzle was far from complete. Police needed help. Fast. They turned to the public, releasing Tanya's photo and begging for any tips. News helicopters flew over the scene at Banks and Lumistown roads. Flyers went out. Do you know anything? Did you see something? Authorities even offered a $1,000 reward for information leading to an arrest. But for days, the phone barely rang. And the calls that did come in? All dead ends. People wondered, what about the DNA under her fingernails? Shouldn't that solve it? But here's the part most people don't realize. This isn't a crime show. In real life, DNA doesn't pop up in an instant with a name and address. It takes time, weeks, sometimes even months. And meanwhile, the clock was ticking. Then came a break. During a second sweep of the crime scene, a partially burned cardboard box was found beneath Tanya's body. It looked ordinary, but upon closer inspection, it wasn't. There was a logo on it, one that belonged to a local moving company, and a number. Detectives followed the trail, taking the number straight to the company and asking a simple question. Can you track where this box was delivered? And the answer? Yes, they could. That specific box had been shipped to a man named Dennis Parrish, who lived on the 800 block of West Arbor Avenue. Police had a name, an address, a location. They went straight there. When they arrived, no one answered the door. But they didn't need Dennis to be home. They had a warrant. Once inside, the pieces of the puzzle began falling into place. And what they found sent chills down every spine in that room. Trash bags, matchsticks, a freshly dated Home Depot receipt for gloves, a long 20-foot rope, an accelerant, and one very unsettling detail. Something inside that house wasn't just suspicious. It was screaming that something horrible had happened there. And soon, they would find out exactly what. The moment investigators stepped into Dennis Parrish's home, they knew something was off. The place reeked of bleach and heavy-duty cleaning chemicals. Not your typical, I mopped the floors type of clean. This was the kind of sanitization that screamed of panic and guilt. Suspecting that someone had tried to wipe away more than just dust, the forensics team sprayed luminol across the carpets, walls, and floors. And what lit up under the black light was bone-chilling. Blood everywhere. On the walls, embedded in the carpet, even smeared near the baseboards. It was a massacre in disguise. But then came something worse. Tucked away inside the house, they discovered a hatchet stained with a dark red substance, fresh enough to send the message, whoever had used it had done so recently. At this point, detectives didn't need any more proof that something horrifying had taken place in this home, but they weren't stopping here. They bagged everything, evidence, DNA swabs, fingerprints, and turned their focus toward one mission, finding Dennis Parrish. That didn't take long. The very next day, July 12, 2018, Parrish was tracked down and arrested at a local hotel where he'd been hiding out, keeping a low profile. But there was something odd about him. His hands. Both were wrapped in bandages, as if trying to cover something up. When officers asked him to remove the wrappings, they found what they feared. Deep scratches, bruises, torn up skin. The kind of marks that don't come from work or an accident, but from a fight, a violent one. And with that, the picture became clearer. They had their man. Down at headquarters, Parrish was placed in the interrogation room. With a crime scene this graphic and evidence this damning, detectives didn't waste time dancing around the truth. They went straight for the jugular. "What did you do to Tanya Cook?" But Parrish didn't respond the way they expected. Yes, he admitted. He knew Tanya. But no, they weren't romantically involved. He claimed they were just acquaintances, nothing more. According to him, on the night of the incident, they had been hanging out when suddenly, out of nowhere, someone tried to rob them. During this so-called robbery, he said, Tanya got injured, fatally. The alleged attacker fled, and Parrish panicked. Afraid no one would believe him, he confessed that he moved Tanya's body to the field, but insisted he had nothing to do with her death. Detectives had heard plenty of stories in their careers, but this one? It felt convenient, too clean, too rehearsed. Still, there was a problem. Even with the blood, the DNA, and the suspicious behavior, there wasn't enough yet to officially charge him with murder. For now, Parrish could only be charged with tampering with evidence and improperly disposing of a human body. It was a start, but far from justice. He was booked into county jail, and detectives kept the pressure on. They brought him in again, and again. Each time, pressing harder, waiting for the moment he slipped. And on July 21st, 2018, he finally cracked. The facade fell. The story changed. This time, Dennis Parrish confessed. He told investigators that he had, in fact, killed Tanya Cook with his bare hands, and it hadn't happened quickly. It wasn't a single blow or instant death. It was drawn out, brutal, prolonged, deliberate. There was no intruder, no robbery, just him and Tanya. With that confession, charges were upgraded. Now he was facing murder. But if you followed true crime long enough, you know, justice moves slowly. Even though he was arrested in 2018, Dennis Parrish wouldn't see the inside of a courtroom until 2022. For Tanya's loved ones, those 4 years were a nightmare on repeat. Her family, especially her mother, Faye, was forced to live in a kind of emotional purgatory, mourning a daughter whose life was ripped away and waiting endlessly for accountability. Faye Cook had raised Tanya with love. She watched her daughter dream of having children of her own, and now she stood in front of cameras trying to find strength in front of the world while barely holding herself together inside. No mother, she said, should have to feel this kind of pain. And yet, even in her grief, she stood with grace, thanking the New Jersey State Police and every officer who worked tirelessly to catch her daughter's killer. That day, the family received bittersweet news. Dennis Parrish had been formally arrested for Tanya's murder. It wasn't closure, but it was something. As the trial finally began, the prosecution came out swinging, laying out all the forensic evidence, the confession, the timeline, the lies. But then came the defense. Their argument? That Parrish's confession had been coerced, that he had said what investigators wanted to hear, under pressure, not truth. The defense rolled out a revised story, a new version of events that seemed carefully crafted to align with the evidence. Now they claimed that Tanya and a group of friends came to Parrish's house to rob him. According to this updated version, during a struggle between Tanya and Parrish, another person, one of her alleged accomplices, hit him in the head, knocking him unconscious. And while he was passed out, they claimed an argument broke out between Tanya and her own people. That's when, according to Parrish, someone struck her in the head, killing her. When he woke up, he allegedly found Tanya's body in his basement and, terrified, chose to move her and burn the remains. The defense even pointed to the autopsy. Tanya had alcohol and drugs in her system. They used this to imply her judgment may have been impaired. But even with all these shifting stories, one thing remained. Tanya Cook was gone. A mother had lost her daughter. A family had been shattered. And someone with blood on their hands, was still trying to twist the truth. When the case finally made its way into the courtroom, the defense tried to paint a version of events that felt hollow. They claimed Tanya had simply come to Dennis Parrish's house that night to get money she allegedly needed to feed a habit. But prosecutors, and anyone paying close attention, knew that story didn't hold water. In fact, the evidence told a completely different tale. Digital forensics had recovered the last known messages between Dennis and Tanya. It was all there, clear as day. On July 24, 2018, Dennis messaged Tanya through Facebook Messenger. He said he wanted to see her. Tanya agreed, but when he asked her to come over to his place, she initially said no. She preferred he come to her instead. His response, "You're too far. I'm not coming all the way out there." It was quiet for a while after that. Hours passed, and then just after 2 a.m., Dennis messaged again. "I'm on the way to pick you up." He added something else, something that would echo painfully later in the courtroom. "I want to do what grown folks do." Tanya replied simply, "Okay." That was the last confirmed interaction between them. By 7:41 a.m., all communications stopped. The prosecution argued that this was the moment everything changed. Somewhere between those early morning hours and sunrise, Dennis snapped. Something set him off. Maybe it was rejection. Maybe it was frustration. But what started as a sexual advance turned into violence. According to prosecutors, Dennis became aggressive. His anger escalated fast. He struck her once, then again. One of those blows was too hard, too much. Tanya stopped responding. She didn't wake back up. Panic set in. Dennis realized what he had done, and instead of calling for help, instead of facing the consequences, he went darker, much darker. He reached for a hatchet. Whatever hope Tanya had of surviving ended there. Dennis didn't just try to cover up the crime. He tried to erase her entirely. He placed her body in plastic bags, wrapped and hidden. And then days later, neighbors noticed something strange. Dennis was seen backing a U-Haul truck up to the side of his house. But unlike a typical move, he didn't load much. Just one thing, a 2-foot-long sack. Witnesses said that's all he carried out. No furniture, no boxes, just that one sack. The prosecution alleged that inside that sack were the remains of Tanya Cook. He placed it into a box. Then he drove about 22 miles out of Vineland to Lawrence Township, to that same lonely field where her body would later be found. He opened the box, scattered the bags across the field, and then ignited them with an accelerant, trying to burn away every trace of what he had done. Then he drove away, headed home, cleaned up, and started his final act, disappearing. Dennis packed what he could and checked into a nearby hotel, the same one where authorities would eventually find him hiding. He thought he'd pulled it off. He thought the fire had destroyed all the evidence. He even called his daughter, trying to line up an alibi, to place himself somewhere else. He was confident, cocky even. But what he didn't count on was a cardboard box. Remember that scorched field? Investigators found a partially burned cardboard box beneath Tanya's remains. That box still had something crucial, a shipping label, a barcode that led straight to him. The box never fully caught fire, and that one detail unraveled everything. It was as if Tanya herself had left behind a silent message, a final clue, a way to make sure her voice wasn't silenced forever. But one question still haunted everyone, the timeline. Tanya's body was discovered on July 2nd, and forensic tests confirmed she had been in that field for roughly 36 hours before being found. So, if prosecutors claim the crime took place back on June 24th, where was Tanya for those missing 8 days? They had an answer. They believed Dennis had placed her in a freezer, somewhere in his home, delaying the disposal until he could figure out what to do next. It was a chilling possibility, but it made sense. Cold, calculated, cowardly. And when it came to motive, legally speaking, the state didn't need one. The evidence alone was overwhelming. But if you look closer, it wasn't hard to connect the dots. He said the drive was too far. Then he made it anyway. He wanted grown folks' business. And when he didn't get what he wanted, he lashed out. And Tanya paid the price. When it was all laid out for the jury, the digital trail, the physical evidence, the neighbor's testimony, and that box, they didn't hesitate. Dennis Parrish was found guilty on all charges. At 57 years old, he was sentenced to 63 years in prison before he would even be eligible for parole, which for someone his age was essentially a life sentence. But even with a verdict, some questions still hang in the air. What really happened in those final hours with Tanya Cook? Only Dennis Parrish knows the full truth, and he hasn't told it. What we do know is this: Tanya Cook was a woman who wanted the simple joys of life, a home, a family, peace. She was kind, loved by many, and taken too soon by someone who didn't deserve to be near her light. Evil doesn't always wear a mask. Sometimes it knocks on your door in the middle of the night. Sometimes it says, "I'm on my way," in a Facebook message. And sometimes it looks like someone you used to trust. Tanya Cook was a woman with a full heart and simple dreams. She didn't want the world, just a little piece in her corner of it. But instead, her life was stolen not by a stranger in the shadows, but by someone who asked to see her, then silenced her forever. Her story isn't just tragic, it's a warning. Because when someone like Tanya, loved, vibrant, hopeful, can vanish so violently, we're all reminded how fragile life really is, and how quickly it can be taken by someone else's decision. And the most chilling part? We may never know what truly happened in those final moments. Only one man knows, and he's not talking. So here's the question I leave you with tonight. What do you think really happened behind closed doors? Was it a crime of passion, or a cold, calculated act masked by convenience? Let me know what you believe down in the comments. Because here on True Crimes Retells, your voice matters. We're more than just viewers. We are the ones who carry these stories forward. Every time one of you shares these stories, you don't just spread awareness, you might actually prevent someone out there from becoming the next Tanya Cook. That's the power of truth. That's the purpose of this community. So if you're a Rattel, if you're one of us, then make sure her name is never forgotten. Like this video, leave your thoughts, share it wide. Let the world know what happened to Tanya Cook. New stories drop every single week, only on True Crimes Retells, raw, real, and always respectful to the voices that can no longer speak for themselves. Don't forget to subscribe and turn on notifications so you never miss a story that needs to be heard. Because sometimes the only way to fight the darkness is to shine a light right into it. Thank you for watching. Rest in peace, Tanya. And to the rest of you Retells out there, stay aware, stay relentless, and we'll see you in the next case.